Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we break down the big economic stories shaping our world today. In this video, we're taking a deep dive into a pressing issue in Japan's economy, inspired by Harima Takushi's recent column on countermeasures against rising prices and the risks tied to an overemphasis on overcoming deflation. It's a topic that's not just academic, it's affecting millions of households right now, with prices climbing while growth remains stubbornly flat. So let's unpack this step by step, starting with the current state of affairs. Japan has been grappling with what economists call stagflation, that toxic mix of economic stagnation and inflation. Think about it. GDP is barely higher than it was back in 2018. Consumer spending is actually a tad lower than it was 12 years ago, and real wages have dropped by about 7% since 2018. That's a tough spot for any country, but especially for Japan, which has spent decades trying to shake off deflationary pressures. Now, prices have risen by 12% since 2021, and that's creating real headaches for policymakers. The dilemma here is classic. If you stimulate the economy to fight stagnation, you risk fanning the flames of inflation. But if you tighten policy to curb prices, you could deepen the slowdown. It's like trying to balance on a tightrope while the wind is picking up. Now, let's look at the key players in this drama. On one side, we have the new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, who's made it clear that her priority is growth above all else. She sees the current inflation as mostly cost push, driven by external shocks like the lingering effects of COVID, geopolitical tensions such as Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and a depreciating yen that's making imports more expensive. In her view, this isn't the kind of persistent inflation that demands aggressive action. It's transitory, and cracking down too hard could stifle the recovery Japan so desperately needs. She's even criticized the Bank of Japan for what she called stupid moves, like hiking interest rates from 0 to 0.25% last year. Instead, Takaichi wants to keep the yen weak to help exporters weather potential trade wars, perhaps from figures like Donald Trump, and she's reluctant to interfere much in wage setting, leaving it to private companies rather than pushing for ambitious minimum wage targets like her predecessors did with that 1,500 yen goal. It's a hands-off approach in some ways, betting that growth will eventually lift all boats without needing to slam on the brakes for inflation. But on the other side of the ring is the Bank of Japan, which has a very different take. The BOJ is laser-focused on achieving a stable 2% inflation target, but not just any inflation. They want demand-pull inflation, where rising wages and consumer spending drive prices up in a healthy cycle. They believe we're seeing a shift from pure cost push to something more sustainable, and they're projecting that they'll hit that target by the second half of fiscal 2027. To get there, they've been advocating for gradual rate normalization, warning that keeping real interest rates negative for too long could overheat the economy. They point to service sector inflation, which has held steady at around 2% since mid-2024, as a positive sign tied to wage growth. The BOJ argues that nominal wages need to rise by at least 3% annually to support 2% price increases, assuming 1% productivity growth. However, the data's a bit mixed. Nominal wage hikes have slowed to about 2.6% year-on-year, and real wages are still falling because price rises often outpace those gains. This brings us to the heart of Harima Takushi's critique. The countermeasures against these rising prices are lacking in decisiveness. Sure, the government is talking about economic packages to cushion living costs and boost investment in growth areas, but these feel more like band-aids than bold surgery. For instance, food and energy prices, which make up a third of household budgets, jumped 6% in September, double the rates in the US or Europe, and much of that's due to the weak yen and global supply issues, like rice shortages. Core inflation, stripping out those volatiles, is only at 1.3%, suggesting that the inflation isn't as embedded as the BOJ hopes. Yet, the emphasis remains on overcoming deflation, that ghost that's haunted Japan since the 90s bubble burst. For years, the narrative was all about escaping the deflationary trap, low prices leading to delayed spending, wage stagnation, and a vicious cycle. And to be fair, that's been a real problem. Japan poured trillions into stimulus to break free. But now, with inflation finally here, sticking to that anti-deflation playbook risks overshooting. If Takaichi's growth-first policies lead to too much stimulus, big spending, tax cuts, or keeping rates ultra-low, it could accelerate inflation beyond control, especially if the yen stays weak and imports keep costing more. We've seen hints of this already. Despite narrowing interest rate gaps with the US, the yen weakened further after Takaichi took office, pumping up cost-push pressures while helping exporters. But exporters aren't the whole economy. Everyday consumers are feeling the pinch, with real wages lower than in 2012 and labor market weaknesses persisting. Work hours are 3% below 2012 levels, and lifetime employment systems limit workers' bargaining power. Employers are hesitant to pass on costs, fearing lost competitiveness, and wage hikes from spring negotiations only cover about 16% of workers, so they don't spread widely. This means the virtuous cycle of wages fueling spending, fueling growth isn't kicking in as hoped. So what are the risks if we keep emphasizing deflation's defeat at all costs? Well, we could end up with runaway inflation that forces a harsh correction later, a recession induced by sharp rate hikes to rein it in. The BOJ's board is already split. 2 members wanted immediate hikes in September, showing the tension. Takaichi's alliance with opposition parties might greenlight more fiscal loosening, but without addressing structural issues like labor reforms or productivity boosts, it could just inflate bubbles rather than sustain growth. Historically, Japan's deflation fight has been admirable, pulling the economy from the brink multiple times, but paradigms shift, and clinging to old strategies might blind us to new threats. In the end, this policy clash between the government and the BOJ highlights a deeper truth. Economics isn't just numbers, it's about choices and trade-offs. If Japan doesn't find a balanced path, perhaps through targeted subsidies for vulnerable households, incentives for wage pass-through, or coordinated fiscal monetary tightening, we could see inflation spiral while stagnation lingers. Harima Takushi's column serves as a timely warning. Decisive measures are needed now, not half-hearted ones, to avoid turning the victory over deflation into a Pyrrhic one. What do you think? Should Japan prioritize growth or price stability? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this analysis, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.